Okay. So, good morning, students. I hope my voice is audible. Can anyone confirm this?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. So, good morning again, and I welcome you all in the first lecture of this compiler construction. So let's divide this into two parts. So in the first half, we'll discuss some of the basic logistics of this course, and we'll put a spotlight slightly on the history of the compiler construction. And in the second half, we'll actually focus on the course content, that what exactly is compiler, what what exactly things which are not contributing towards the compiler, and subsequently we'll jump to the significant overview of the phases of the compiler. Yeah. So now, first of all, what exactly is the prerequisite required for this course? As you have, assuming you have gone through the attached course handouts, so a sufficient knowledge of data structures, theory of computation, and even other courses like, let's say, principles of the programming language. So all are required to some extent for understanding the basic grasp of this course. So, I mean, be alert with all the basic fundamentals you might have studied recently across all the possible these courses here. So that is considered to be the prerequisite. And if in at any point of time, if you feel stuck, so that's not any, I mean, there is nothing to, discuss about it. So we can start from the very scratch and we'll discuss some of the important points which are required as for understanding the subsequent course content of the compiler construction here. But these courses are completely, we cannot disregard for understanding the main crux of this course here. And now I recommend certain reading references. So the first reference which I have highlighted in red color, I mean, this is with respect to these authors, that is Ravi Sethi and Uthman. So consider it as a by default standard for this compiler construction here. And most popularly, this book is known by the name of this Dragon book. And the reason being, it has a cover title of the, depicting a very rigorous dragon, indicating the complexity of the compiler construction course here. So also known by this name, that is Dragon book. So I suggest all of you must have this hard copy or either e-copy available with you. And most of the content which we have referred for constructing our slides and all, it's, by this reference even. And apart from this, you can also go for these two references as well. I mean, some further other, some subsequent other topics. So I'll keep on mentioning the reading references in Nalanda corresponding to the covered lectures here. So, but we can't ignore this guy. So this is the basic thing, the Dragon book. And yeah, so all of you might be accessing the Nalanda. So please be in touch with this course code and the other lecture material and other notices and other assignments and any information related to this course, course components and other lecture details. And at any point of time, please, as most of the times I keep on saying, please don't hesitate to interact in the online lecture sessions or through other platforms, even the contact our sessions, and even you can throw an email to me regarding any of your doubts and give feedback throughout the semester, as I usually request you to all of you. So, so this is the first thing which I want to just brief out. Now, today's agenda is very clear, as I clearly mentioned. So in the first half, we'll discuss about a bit history regarding the compiler construction, that how this compiler has emerged in the real world market. And once we have gained this much amount of information, then exactly we will focus on this guy, that what exactly are compilers, what does compiler do? And most importantly, we'll also understand what is not supposed to be done by the compiler. That's very important. And that's where we need to resolve our confusions or certain illusions that what compiler is not supposed to do. And possibly if time persists in the last, we'll also focus on these guys, but I don't think so. We have to spend some other lectures also on these topics. So let's start with this scenario, guys. So bit of history here. So remember, guys, in just late 1950s, we usually have these two things, which usually programmers or any sort of, software developer usually, consider for compiling or for executing their programming language constructs. So generally, two strategies were utilized for implementing the programming languages. One is the interpreters and another one is compilers. Now, make a note of this. Right now, I'm not going to discuss what exactly these two guys are. Hoping all of you are aware of what exactly is an interpreter and what exactly is a compiler. And if not, so we'll come to this very shortly in the same lecture. But right now, we should understand that in the later 1950s, people don't have the explicit compiler, the efficient compiler on which they can compile their programming languages. They have some n number of limitations with respect to the accuracy of the compiler, with respect to the execution speed, with respect to the, let's say, correctness, and other issues as well. Some of the compilers or interpreters are not accepting the high-level language at that time. So people are saying we are only supposed to take the assembly language code or some other type of the programming language constructs. But as soon as the time emerged, we came across certain more inventions as well. So it says that some of the platforms explicitly include either interpreter or compiler, and there are some commodities which include both. Like some of the frequent examples, like Java, we have the JVM available and the interpreter also available in the same platform. And similarly, that is also true for the Lisp as well. So as soon as the time emerged in the later 1950s, few people have come up with certain inventions related to the compiler. See, there was one industry, IBM, they came up with one assembler, which is popularly known as till now, that is Assembler 704, somewhere in 1954. So that was an assembler which was produced in the 1954, and it has huge variety of limitations. Like one I have simply highlighted here, that the cost of the software development was much more higher than the cost of the hardware. So people, it was not completely acceptable in the world, in the real world. Similarly, we have some other inventions related to the speed coding interpreter. So program execution is considered to be very slower. So generally, with respect to the speed coding interpreter, that time people used to say that, the program which we are writing in a very, in a manual way, is generally executing very slower as compared to the handwritten programs. So again, both these important inventions were completely unacceptable. But right now, we haven't seen any explicit compiler. But then what is the first compiler, which actually was acceptable in the real world market? So here it is. The first compiler was known by this name, that is the Fortran first project. And it introduced in this period, somewhere around 1954 to 1957. And this was the scientist known by the name of John Backus, and he's a Turing awardee. So he developed the first compiler, which was known by the name of Fortran first project. And Turing awardee, you might be aware, in generally sciences, we have the Nobel Prizes So just consider that in computer science, it is completely equivalent to that much power of Nobel Prize. And the acceptability of this first compiler was so huge. I mean, the impact of this compiler was so huge. Even, I mean, people in those times was completely, I mean, surprised that how this guy has come up with this compiler without any explicit theory available in the real world market for designing and the development of the compiler. Because as of now, we have the sufficient content, we have the sufficient theoretical notations, which actually facilitates us in designing and the development of compiler. But this guy, this scientist, has developed that compiler in the 1954 without any explicit theory available. So he just come up with a prototype or a completely working compiler. And I mean, people have, I mean, criticized this compiler so much because they were unaware of the fact that it is really worth, I mean, in terms of compiler here. So as I mentioned here, that more than half of the programmers were started using this first compiler by 1958. And it is very fortunate and it is very acceptable. I mean, you can understand what sort of insights this person has, that the present day compilers are following the same basic structure of this first invention, that is Fortran first project. So, I mean, you can imagine the insights, what exactly he has without any explicit theory or without explicit algorithms for which actually facilitates us in the designing and the development of the compiler here. So, as a part of the history, I must suggest that you should remember that what exactly is a bit history, which is the first compiler. And the first compiler, remember one thing, that's the basic structure, the basic algorithms, the basic things. I mean, whatever things which are required for the development of this compiler. The same things we are using right now also. Even GCC compiler is completely following the basic structure of this guy, that is Fortran first project developed by this John Backus here. So this is just a small part related to the history of the compiler that I must suggest that you should remember. I mean, with respect to the that what exactly is the first compiler here. Any questions, anything which you want to discuss up to this point, please feel free to discuss anything related to the history, whatever we have discussed. All right, so now let's move forward. So what exactly is the motivation for studying this compiler here? So, I mean, the picture simply is self-explanatory here. I mean, we have the numerous applications of the compiler technology which is currently available. I mean, it usually facilitates us in the designing and the development of the parsers, the interpreters, even the machine code generation, which actually is the goal of the compiler. I mean, to just translate any high-level language into the machine-level language or to the any low-level language. It usually facilitates various software engineering principles. Like when anyone develop the compiler, so it has to, I mean, it's not just a single jump. It has to go through different abstractions. So that abstractions will be obviously facilitated by the software engineering principles. Suspicious code detection, any sort of malicious code can be easily detected while compiling the different programming constructs, and designing of the computer architectures with respect to the VLSI designs and all. So it has numerous applications. I mean, no one can deny why I'm exactly dealing with this compiler construction part here. So now let's come to the basic thing which actually we want to start discussing with. Then what exactly compilers do, or what exactly compilers are? I need certain responses from your side, guys, please. What exactly compiler do? I mean, you might have using, I mean, you all are using the compilers, let's say from the last 2.5 years. You must know what exactly compiler do. Come on, guys, this is not going to be a one-way interaction. Please respond. I mean, let's you can unmute yourself and you can respond. No response yet. This is very unacceptable. Please.
So compilers convert the code we write in a high-level language such as C or Java into machine code so that the hardware can process it.
Correct. So this is one just relevant, definition or exactly what exactly my compiler does here. What this guy has said just, so it says that it just take any high level language and it just convert into some low level language, let's say, or any machine language that on which the machine is supposed to be executed on the target, let's say, machine here. Now, let me ask few questions, because right now this guy is completely a black box for me. What exactly needs to be done for transforming this high level language into the low level language here? Let me ask you a few questions. You have to answer based on whatever you have learned in the earlier courses. Suppose, let's say this is one program P1 and this is one program P2. And similarly, can I say, is there any technology or is there any mechanism I can say that these two programs are equivalent? Let me write this word, equivalent. Come on, guys. So if I have considered two arbitrary programs, P1 and P2, is there any mechanism to verify whether these two programs are equivalent or not? Recall the concepts we have executed in DOC. Is there any mechanism? Yes or no? At least this much you can respond.
You can input the same strings and then the output should be same.
Correct. So we can say, there is no algorithm, there is no technology which can clearly define whether these two programs are equivalent. But as this guy said, that as far as if we are giving the same inputs in and these are producing the same output, then I can say these two programs are equivalent. Correct? But now the another thing here which we need to understand, as I said earlier, that what exactly compiler is not supposed to do and what exactly is beyond the intelligence of the compiler. Suppose this program has been, is doing, these two programs is doing the sorting, let's say, and this is doing the sorting, let's say, through the bubble sort, and this is doing the sorting through, let's say, some insertion sort. Now, my next question to you, does your compiler have enough intelligence to exactly find out that what exactly these algorithms are? These algorithms are. Yes or no, guys, please.
No.
No. So the answer is acceptable. Thank you so much. So compiler does not have enough intelligence that even, let's say, even they don't know about the algorithms compiler. Even it hasn't have that intelligence enough. Let's suppose as of now, arbitrarily, I'm saying this is a very inefficient algorithm and this is an efficient algorithm. Let's say for the time being. And I'm expecting that compiler will obviously do some sort of a random things to make sure that this inefficiency can be transformed into an efficient algorithm. Even compiler can't able to do such things. Fine. So compiler exactly does what? So as the first guy said, it just one form of the program to the another form of the program. So focus on this. It just changes the representation from one form of the program to the another form of the program. And that forms are high level language and the low level language. So high level language, how to write the piece of the code in the high level language. You need certain identifiers, you need certain data structures, and you need certain control structure. And that will contribute to some program in high level language. Similarly, in the low level language, you have certain let's say memory constraints, you have certain registers, you have certain opcodes, you have stack, you have addressing mode. So only the structure is changing. Fine? The representation is changing. So compiler is not going to work with respect to the algorithms. It can't work algorithmically. It can't think algorithmically. Now, my second question, my another question is, you might have heard that compiler also does certain things with respect to the optimization, right? I mean, it optimizes the code, right? So the low language code must be optimized. It should not have redundancy. It should not have anything which should not be executable. So now the question is, if compiler does not have enough intelligence about the algorithms and all, it doesn't have enough intelligence to perform any sort of conversion from inefficient algorithm to efficient algorithm, how it is supposed to perform the optimization then? The question to you people. Anyone, guys?
Sir,
Yes, please.
sir, it might be converting the high-level code into RISC, like RISC code instead of like complex ISC codes. Instead, it would be converted into the RISC format so that it is easily computable. Maybe
Correct, correct. Any other response with respect to the optimization? Any other, guys? So we said earlier that it is not supposed to understand your program in an algorithmic way or any sort of intelligence it does not possess. So how it is possible then it can do the optimization? Because if you want to remove the redundancy, or if the compiler wants to optimize the code, at least it should have enough intelligence. But that doesn't need some sort of enough intelligence for executing this optimization. So we'll focus this process very lately in this course, but as of now, we must understand what exactly needs to be done in terms of optimization. Suppose, as this person said, I mean, it's some clean code. Suppose if I am writing certain code like this, if true, then I'll execute this S1, otherwise I'll execute S2. Now I know this part of the code is never going to be executed, right, by my compiler, and even I will do the manual computation. So optimization will focus on such things, that elimination of the dead code. If I'm doing some costly computations, let's assume multiplication is a costly computation. So rather than multiplication, I just prefer addition over multiplication. So such sort of optimization things compiler needs to do, I mean, as a part of his own intelligence. But algorithmically, he cannot do anything, right? So I think the somewhat part is clear what exactly needs to be done by the compiler. I mean, this thing here, as a part of, as long as we are giving certain same inputs to two different programs, so it should produce the same outputs here, corresponding to their own computations here. So again, the same thing. Convert simply one form of the program to another program. Fine. It could be high level to low level, right? And it could be any high level to the target program. Target program means, I mean, any program which is actually developed for the target machine. So usually from high level source code language to the low level machine code. Now another question to you people, I mean, does each and every compiler always translates or converts high level language to the low level language, or is there any compiler which exactly does the translation from high level language to simply high level language? Making sense, guys? Because as of now, conventionally, or just we'll say, I mean, based on the recent state of art, we know that compiler usually does the translation from high level language to the low level language. But it is quite possible that there are certain compilers which can do the translation from high level language to high level language, right? I can say from, let's say, Pascal to C, fine, C to C++, or C++ to C. I mean, this is possible, right? So, but conventionally, we usually, I mean, do such things. And that's why you might have heard that it has been mentioned so many times that from any high level language to any target language. That means the language which is suitable for that target machine. And that language could be either a low level language, it could be even object code, it could be any high-level language. So please note this thing. Now, again, let's focus on this source code and the machine code one more time. So remember that the source code is generally optimized for the human readability. It should be very expressive enough and redundant to omit the errors. Whereas the machine code should be optimized for the resultant target machine, resultant terminal, resultant hardware. So redundancy is reduced and intent about the code is somewhat lost. So it says that the compiler need those source code which could be very expressive enough. Even, I mean, as of human, we don't have any machine, assuming, let's say we don't have any compiler, but still if we use our previous knowledge, we'll able to reach at a certain point that, okay, this program is doing this and this, because we all are familiar with the high level language. The constructs are designed and it are represented across different abstractions of the program using functions and all. So it is very expressive and as well as redundant to omit the errors and all. But at the same time, the machine code, it's optimized, it has to be optimized for the resultant hardware. So it should not have redundancy. And as a result, the intent about the code is somewhat lost. And that is acceptable. If I have given you two pieces of code which exactly do the same computation and which one program is written in a high level language and the another is written in a machine, I mean this assembly language or the machine level language, the low level language. So obviously you will not able to make at a certain point of time that what exactly this machine code is computing, with this in contrast to what exactly source code is computing, because the source code which is written in high level language is very expressive in contrast to the same low level language. So that is the difference. Only the representation is the difference, and the redundancy has to be reduced at the machine code level. I mean, using certain processes of optimization and on. And obviously, the intent about the code is somewhat lost, which is not true for the source code here. So now, what exactly is happening here with respect to the translation here? I mean, this transformation, which we generally say the translation process. So source code and the machine code is going to mismatch in terms of different levels of the abstractions here. Like I said, that your source code is going to be deal with certain identifiers or variables, operators, certain expressions, certain data structures, certain control flow statements. However, your machine code is going to deal with some different things. It is going to deal with certain variables which needs to be kept in memory. We are also going to use certain registers, stat, opcodes, addressing modes, and whatnot. So you see, we have different abstractions with respect to source code as well as the machine code also. And this is how we have to change the representation, right? And it is also, mentioned here that it is quite possible that some source languages which are written in high level, they are very closer to the machine languages, the low level languages, while some are not. So it doesn't matter. We have to, go through the compiler here. So this is the thing which we have discussed. So we have to make a jump from here to here, introducing certain level of abstraction here. So if I'll say one more time, so let's assume we have the abstractions at the source code level, which I have just said, identifiers, operators, expressions, statements, we have conditional statements, we have iterations, functions, and other things as well. We have certain abstractions at the target code level, and in between we have the compiler sitting here, and this he has to just transform. So this is the just transformation which exactly needs to be done by the compiler. And it is very important to know that this jump is not a very small jump that we just press one button and we just came across these abstractions. So we have to take some series of small steps, small different phases, and each and every step is very independent enough so that if certain set of customizations needs to be done, so it should be done without disturbing the other phases and components here. So it is very modular enough. So this is not a very small step. Instead, this is a very series of some small steps here that we need to transform this representation here. Now, the goals of the translation. I mean, let's suppose we had reached at the end of the course, we did the translation. So it says that it should show certain efficient performance related to the compile time. It should be quick enough. Let's suppose you are sitting on some terminal and you have written a piece of code and you have just submitted the request for the compile time. And the compiler say, okay, I'm going to take 30 minutes for compile time, right? So your life will somehow make, hell here, because you are not supposed to wait for 30 minutes, right? So your compiler must be very efficient enough in terms of compilation time and all. Correctness of the compiler. There are two things with respect to the correctness. Either your compiler written has some bugs or your program which is developed has some bugs. If your program has not bugs, but still compiler has certain bugs, and still it is not able to compile successfully, it is showing some unnecessary bugs. So that is the, I should say, the unfortunate case for the compiler, because it is suffering from certain bugs, it is suffering from certain errors. And being a developer, one has to resolve those errors so that the program can be successfully compiled. But it is not as easy as we are thinking, right? So suppose if I ask you, right now we have the GCC compiler. Assuming that GCC compiler almost have more than 1 lakh lines of code, right? So if I have somehow we came across any bug in GCC, so it is very difficult to trace that bug. With respect to this huge number of lines of the code, unless someone has that much proficiency about how he has developed that compiler here. So correcting the compiler, removing the bugs once it is fully developed, it's very tedious task, I must say. Fine. So one has to ensure the correctness of the compiler. Your compiler should not report the bugs in its own code. Maintainable code. So this part we will focus later, but as of now, you should understand what exactly is the maintainable code here. Suppose you are, transforming your high-level language to some target machine. So this transformation needs not to be done each and every single time, right? Suppose, you have done one-time translation. So this code should be very maintainable. It should be reused across some different machines. So that is what exactly it is mean by it should be maintainable. It should be reused in different contexts. It should be able to detect the errors, as I said, with respect to the correctness here. So the goals of the translation we must remember with respect to the correctness and the efficiency with respect to the compile time that it is supposed to observe. So this is just the overview. What exactly is the compiler? How is supposed to be done by the with respect to the translation? What are the different layers of the abstraction across these the different varieties of the code, that is with respect to the source code and to the low-level machine code. Now, what exactly needs to be done in the process of the translation? So, as I said, we have to translate our high-level language code in series of small steps. I said in appropriate step, generate a chain of some valid intermediate representations. So instead of taking a single jump, I'll say I'll contribute towards some small jumps like this. Let it be any number, but I'll introduce some intermediate representations, and those intermediate representations are also acceptable. So output to here is somewhat a different representation. Similarly, here also some different representation. So we are reaching closer to the machine code very shortly. We can't take a single jump. And such representations must be easily modifiable to any kind of changes in a program. Fine. Now, what do you think, guys? I mean, as per your recent knowledge, or if you have studied something earlier, what do you think as a part of translation? What should be my first step? I mean, what exactly needs to be done as a part of first step of translation? The question to you people. Come on, guys, I need certain responses. I mean, I'm not expecting certain formal answers from your side that you should give me the name of the translation phases. I'm just saying, what should be the first step towards your source code?
Check.
Identifying the tokens in the high level language.
Identifying the tokens in the high level language. So this is our goal. And can you put some more light how we are going to extract these tokens?
Like we can check, for example, whether a particular word is an identifier or an operator.
Correct, correct. So we'll obviously find that that word is in our dictionary or not, is in our repository or not, is it valid or invalid or not. Let's talk in a layman language. I mean, let's suppose we are not talking in terms of programming language. Let's talk in a layman language, in some informal English language. Suppose right now, if I write some sentence like this, we are in class. Let's suppose I have written this statement in an English language, and subsequently we'll jump to the programming language. Is this statement right? Yes or no, guys? Please, quickly. Come on, guys. We are in class. Is this statement right?
Yes.
Yes. I mean, can you explain, I mean, how did you say this word yes, based on which knowledge?
Like the grammatical structure.
Yeah, correct.
Subject.
So you might be knowing the grammar's rules. You might be knowing that these are some of the existing words in an English dictionary are in class, right? So this is exactly what we need to understand as a part of first step. That we need to understand that what is the existing dictionary of our programming language on which we are working. Suppose if I'll just introduce a small change here. Let's suppose instead of this, I'm writing something, any symbol here, let's say this dollar symbol. Now, again, my question to you people, is this sentence is still right? Come on, guys, please quickly.
No.
No, why no? Can you please highlight more?
Because one word is spelled incorrectly.
It's correct. It's correct. So, I mean, it's simply a wrong misinterpretation, because the reason being, I used a letter dollar which exactly does not fall in the dictionary of the English. So as far I know, and you people assuming you know, that we have only 26 letters in English, either in lowercase letters or in uppercase letters. So this is a invalid character. And that's where I came to know that this is a wrong thing. So the first step, always remember as a part of translation, that to just identify the valid list of the character set in your programming language, underlying programming language constructs. Number one, what should be my next step? Once I find out, okay, all the characters seems to be valid, what should be my next step? Some of you have already answered. I mean, one guy just said that we need to identify the valid tokens, the valid words. So for tokens, we can use words as of now. So R, assuming again, if I change this guy again to back to the same thing. So I identified all are the valid words. Now, do you think once you have identified all the valid characters, the next step is just the identification of the words? Fine. Let me give you an example. Suppose if I have modified this thing like this. Come on, guys. Is this still correct correct sentence? Obviously not. So what should be the next step then?
We should check whether the words belong to a dictionary or not.
No, obviously we'll check that. But how will we check? Because right now right now it is feasible for you only to identify these are valid words because I have introduced these white spaces, right? Assuming I have not introduced the white spaces, so how will you identify the appropriate words? This is my question. So how will you identify? You means you should consider now yourself not as a human, you should consider yourself as a compiler, as some smart program. So how will you identify that these are not a single word, this is a separate word, R is a separate word and in is a separate word? This is my question. So what should be the next step then?
Delimiters.
So we need to identify what are the delimiters. We need to identify what are my boundaries, word boundaries. So if my compiler is smart enough, so it should identify, oh, come on, this is my word boundary and this is a separate token and this is a separate token, right? So once you have identified that all are the characters are valid in the English, in my programming language, the next step is not just identification of words. The next step is to identify what are the word boundaries, right? What are the word boundaries? Because assuming I have not introduced the white spaces, I have written like this, right? We are in class, let's say CSF 364. So how will I identify the appropriate words? Unless my compiler is not smart enough to find out the appropriate word boundaries, he's not able to catch up the exact words. So if it is smart enough, so he'll say, okay, this is the word boundary, this is the word boundary, this is the word boundary, this is the word boundary. I mean, based on certain rules that. So right now we are just identifying the steps. And the third step is, after identifying the words, now I can identify what is the exact word. I am matching with the dictionary, so it is found. Obviously, this word we cannot find in dictionary because this is a proper noun. So we'll use certain rules here. But these are the 3 steps we have to follow. I hope it is clear now. If you have any question up to this point, any confusion, you can immediately ask. Okay. So the first step, the name is itself indicating the meaning. We are going to do some sort of an analysis with respect to the lexical constraints, the vocabulary constraints, right? So step number 1, guys, identify the valid set of the characters in the language. Remember, we have to focus here, the valid set of characters. Fine, like I told you earlier. Break the sequence of the characters in appropriate words. And how we are going to do that is identifying the appropriate word boundaries. And from here onwards, we don't call it as a word, we'll call it as a tokens. And what are the words in the, let's say, in a dictionary of C? Fine. First of all, do we have some dictionary of C language? The question to you people. Come on, guys. Do we have some dictionary in C? Yes. So if your answer is yes, can you just say what exactly, can you find this keyword, this word in the dictionary of C? Whosoever has said yes.
No.
Or any other response?
We can't find this.
Yeah, we can't find this, but still it is a valid word. Is it acceptable? Because it can be an identifier, right?
Yes.
So we can say that there is no well-defined dictionary in the C, but still we have one dictionary of, let's say, the keywords, some of the reserved words, like if, else, construct. So this is a valid keyword. This is the word we can find in the existing dictionary of the C. Right, but these words we can't define. So how will we tokenize them? We have certain rules for them, right? So we have certain variables, identifiers, we have certain numbers, we have certain operators, we have certain punctuation symbols like these full stop, semicolon, comma, and so on and so forth. And these punctuation symbols, if you understand, these can help you in identifying sometimes the word boundaries, but not always. Because as soon as if I am writing here, let's say the full stop, this is a punctuation symbol. So I'm expecting a new word from here. The word separators. Making sense, guys? So we have this much information available with the C here. And once we are done with the second step, and now we can say, okay, we have this much information. Now we can say whether these tokens are valid or not. The words which we have recognized after identifying the word boundaries seems to be valid or not. And if they are invalid, we'll report the error. And if they are valid, then we'll pass those valid tokens to the next particular translation phase. So this is what we call the first step, the steps in the lexical analysis. Again, before moving, any issue, any doubt, you can immediately raise. Fine. So let's put some more light now in with respect to the programming constructs here. So identifying or spotting the tokens is not as simple we think, guys. Because let's see, again, if I am giving you an example, I mean, you can consider I have written, this is the first lecture, this is the first module of compiler. And you can see I have given these white spaces very arbitrary, I mean, in a very arbitrary way, very randomly. And now your compiler must be very smart enough to say, oh, come on, as soon as your compiler has read T, okay, say, I'll keep on reading. It says, I'll read H, I'll keep on reading. I'll read I, I'll keep on reading. But I hit the white space. Should I consider it as a word boundary? Or I should say it is a token? No, I know this is not a valid word in my dictionary. Let's assume that. So I'll say I'll keep on reading more. As soon as I read S, I'll say, okay, now I should stop and I should say this is now my word boundary and this is a appropriate token here. So spaces, white spaces does not always mean that it has to be an appropriate word boundary. Fine. So that's the thing you need to understand here. So compiler, as a part of the first step, the very important step, guys, it should know the process of recognizing the word boundaries. If your compiler, a small compiler, let's say Lexer, is very successful enough in recognizing the word boundaries, then he can simply recognize the valid and the invalid words, the valid and the invalid tokens. My job is done. Fine. So now again, let's suppose if I have written something like this, let's talk about it with respect to the programming language construct. I mean, first of all, can this be tokenized? Guys, question to you people, can this be tokenized? Just a small statement. Yes or no?
Yes.
How will I tokenize? So I'll tokenize it separately. Let's assume this is an assignment operator. This is one punctuation symbol. Let's say the semicolon. This is my if construct and this is my else construct. Now here one illusion that I should remove from your mind if it exists. Lexical analysis, the first translation phase, has to do nothing whether your program is syntactically written correctly or incorrectly. It has to do nothing whether your program is semantically written correctly or not. its just goal is to just identify the valid set of tokens. Because as of now, I have written some arbitrary set of tokens which doesn't make any sense with respect to the actual logic of the programming language. But still, lexical analysis says, oh, come on, my goal is not that. My goal is to just recognize the appropriate set of tokens which you probably have freezed in the language specification part of that programming language. Fine. So here, the final point. So lexical analysis says the set of the characters, give me the set of characters in any random form, and I'll generate the sequence of tokens here. Fine, guys. This is what we need to understand here. So we are just taking the overview of these translation phases, guys, here. How we are going to do that, we'll see in the subsequent lectures here. So hence, the goal of the lexical analyzer is to break a sentence into series of words or tokens. White spaces, punctuation symbols are usually considered to be word separators in English language, but not always, as I gave you the previous example here. So here, white spaces are not making my life easy. Rather, it is making my life more rigorous, because I know the word boundary is not somewhere here, it is somewhere after S. Similarly, the word boundary is not here just because of this white space, it is somewhere here. Right? So, but sometimes white spaces and punctuation symbols are considered to be the word separators. Fine. And most of the times, even a single character from a different class can also be identified as a word boundary. Like if I have given you some input like this, I mean, just treat it without any white space. If P, this equals to Q, then flag equals to 1. So sequence of tokens you can see. So one token is this, another is this one, then flag, sorry, equal to, this is an assignment, there's a thing here. Fine, guys. So this is the exact output of the lexical analysis here. So identify the token, ignore the white spaces, comments, etc. So lexical analysis also disregard the comments and all, which are completely non-executable. It reports the error. So when it will report an error, guys? Come on, guys, question to you people again quickly. When this phase will report an error to you? Oh, no one. Come on.
Like if there are overlapping tokens, like
so if I'll get some invalid token, which I am saying after recognizing something, I got, let's say, IFF, let's say, and let's assume this is something which is not written in my dictionary. So I'll say this is an invalid token, I'll report an error. Fine. This is an invalid token. Why it is an invalid token? Because this is not existing in my specifications of the language. It is not existing in my current dictionary, which I have made on my own. So I'll simply report it as a lexical error. My job is done. Because what is my goal? My goal is to find out the appropriate set of tokens. Fine. So the rules, which I said, like how will we identify these variables and all. So rules will be designed using certain regular expressions, and that that can be recognized using the finite state machines. We already discussed these concepts a long time back in DOC. Fine. So lexical phase errors, which I was calling about. So occurrence of the illegal characters, obviously, which are not defined in my dictionary. Suppose dollar is not there in my dictionary. So I'll say, okay, this is an invalid character and hence an invalid token. And another lexical errors phase could be exceeding the length of an identifier. Suppose, I mean, this is just one example. With this, I mean, apart from these illegal characters. Suppose in the rules it is mentioned that your identifier length should not be greater than 50 characters, right? It should not be greater than 50 characters, and someone has crossed that limit, right? So it will say this is I mean, suppose if I am writing some identifier, let's say up to let's say 55 character length. So possibly what exactly your compiler do, there are two cases. Either it will throw an error that it is simply exceeding the length of the identifier, or it will simply say, okay, this is assuming up to 50 length. So this will say this is an identifier. And again, the next part, it will also tokenize it as a different identifier. So in both cases, it has to follow one of them. Either it will simply throw an error, or it will simply tokenize at a different identifiers, different variables. Fine. So we have next phase, that is parsing, that we'll study in the next session. So now I'm expecting certain questions from your side, guys. Please ask. So I'm stopping here. If you have any question, you can ask with respect to whatever we have discussed. Any question, guys? Any questions, guys? Otherwise, then we can stop here. All right, someone is saying, could you talk about the evaluative components? So I have mentioned the evaluative components in the course handout. So apart from the mid-sem examination, this time we are going to conduct 2 quizzes. So one quiz would be in the somewhere here, possibly before 10 days or 10 to 15 days of mid-sem, and the another would be in the 10 to 15 days before your compre exam. And there would be only one makeup, combined makeup for the quiz 1 and quiz 2 here. And in the quiz 1 and quiz 2, there would be some programming examples, there would be some fill in the blanks, there would be anything, whatever we are discussing with respect to this. Obviously, we'll use the new phase, new portal of this Nalanda. I'll let you know about this because the old version of the Nalanda will be exhausted, I think, within a few couple of days.
Sir, could you confirm if there's a project in this course this semester?
So yeah, so earlier there was a project in this course. So this time for this single time, we are just skipping this project component, evaluative component completely. The reason being, we discussed with the HOD as well that in this online mode, it is generally difficult for us to execute this online exam and other project components. So that's why we completely skip this part. But once the students will back on campus, so we have to carry forward the same scenario. But this time, this would not be evaluative, by sure. Is it clear? I mean, whosoever has asked this.
Yes, sir.
Do we call a program from which converts a program from one high-level language to another language as compiler 2? Yes, as I said, IGNA permit that it is not at all necessary that your compiler should always convert a high-level language to a low-level language. It is quite possible that one high-level language could be translated to another high-level language for that target machine. Correct? But most of the time, conventionally, we have seen the compiler is doing from one to low-level language. Does a lexical analyzer have the power to find the word boundary even if there is a white space in between? Yes, so it is very helpful if you are intentionally including the white spaces, I mean the relevant white spaces, so lexical analyzer have the power to find the word boundary if there is a white space in between them. This is my response to Rahul Podar.
Excuse me, sir?
Yeah.
Sir, you said that the compiler usually ignores the white spaces and if finds the token using the delimiters that it has
Correct.
and
Correct.
the keywords. So, considering that, for example, if we take a statement like if we are
Should I
defining
write
a
the
variable.
statement? You
Sir, I just had an example which might contradict the fact, so I was just asking if it is valid or not.
Yeah, please go on.
If we define a variable like like we do in C language, like
Correct.
int and the variable name. So if the variable name is even if
Okay.
EVENIF. So
Okay.
if we forgo the white spaces, then there is a chance that there might be an error. Like the compiler can either go for either take even if as an identifier, or it could use its keyword dictionary to identify the if part of the even if as another keyword. So
I understood your question. Let
yes,
me
sir.
write here and just verify whether I'm correct or wrong. I mean, based on your whether I'm answering your question or not. You are saying if something is like this, right?
Yes, sir.
And it is quite possible that compiler would simply declare it as a complete identifier, or compiler would simply say it is an identifier or this is a keyword, or
Yes, sir.
compiler will simply throw a lexical error. This is what you're
Yes, sir.
saying?
Yes,
So
sir.
now what exactly is your question?
Sir, so what I was asking was that if we actually use if the lexical analyzer would have used white spaces also as a delimiter, then this problem won't have arisen if we write the
Right.
program.
Right.
But as you are saying that it does not, it completely ignores white spaces, so this error might occur. So what is the exact?
No. This error will not happen. I'll tell you.
Okay.
See, lexical error, we'll discuss this thing very surely in the upcoming lectures when we are going to spend almost 4 to 5 lectures completely on the lexical analysis. But since you have raised this doubt here, so let me answer this. Lexical analyzer follows the principle of the maximal munch. So you might be remembering what exactly is maximal munch principle if you have studied somewhere in the data structure or discrete mathematics. Maximal munch principle says always consume the maximum symbols till you reach any appropriate word boundary, right? So compiler will do what? Compiler, I mean, it's up to the specification, but assuming the specification says follows the principle of the maximal munch. So compiler will do what? It will read E, it will keep on reading N, it will read I, all right? It will again go this particular F, and now it will recognize that, okay, now I have consumed something. Now there are two things. So apart from the maximal munch principle, the language specification should also define the priority. Priority in between the identifiers and the keywords. So if language specification says that if there is an overlap between the identifiers and the keywords, always give the keywords higher priority. Fine. Understood
Yes,
this much part? And if this it is so, then it'll say, oh, come on, then according to me, this is a word boundary, and this will recognize as a if keyword, and this will recognize as a identifier. This is one answer to your question. And if, say, the language specification says that we have to give the preference to the identifiers rather than keywords, then it is quite possible that the compiler will simply recognize this as an identifier. Fine.
Okay.
But usually it is expected that the keywords have the higher priority over the identifiers. Fine. So there is no question of spaces here. So lexical analyzer says that if you will give me the spaces in the test cases, I will remove those spaces, right? And then even I am able to tokenize, because I know the principle of the maximal munch. I know where to stop, because I know where to find the appropriate word boundary. And because you see, if I have written something like this, right? So as soon as I have read A, right? Even we don't assume white spaces here, right? As
Yes,
soon
sir.
as I have this assignment operator, lexical analyzer say, oh, come on, I have hit another class of the operator, another class which does not match with this class. So that means this is a word boundary.
Yes, sir.
Fine. So this is how the lexical analyzer work on the basis of the word boundaries. I hope I answered your question or I go somewhere else.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay. So we'll discuss these things in detail when we are in the lexical analysis. What kind of optimization was you referring about the compiler? So optimization is only with respect to that I am just doing some efficient computations rather than inefficient computations. Let's suppose if I am doing, let's say, let me introduce the pen. So if I am doing, let's say, let's assume there is some code which does not get even compiled in every single iteration. So my goal is to eliminate such code. So this is one example of the optimization. Fine. Another example could be if, I mean, elimination of the sub expressions you might have heard in somewhere in C or data structures. If I have multiple sub expressions like this 5 into 6 minus 3 into 5, such things. So I can simply evaluate this because compiler need not to spend time on such evaluations again and again in every go. Fine. Another thing is, I mean, some sort of this computations, multiplications, this computations. So this should be avoidable because these are very expensive rather than I can use addition or multiplication over these. So such kind of optimization I'm talking about. Is it fine? Pujara, Pujan, Shailesh, Pai? Any other question, guys?
Sir, I couldn't find the handout in Nalanda.
I did not upload it on Nalanda. I have uploaded on the AUGST website.
Okay.
So, but still, I'll upload on Nalanda as well for your reference.
Thank you, sir.
No deterministic way to say that, Upura. Then how do we check the correctness of the compiler? Correct. So obviously we said there is no way to we say that the two programs are equivalent. Then how do we check the correctness of the compiler? See, the correctness of the compiler is not with respect to the equivalence mechanism. First of all, let's be clear. Correctness of the compiler is that if your program is written correctly without any single bug, but still the compiler is throwing some error. That means the compiler written is has some bugs. Compilers itself has some bugs. So that bug is not with respect to the equivalence mechanism between the two programs, right? You need to understand this thing. But since the program length is very high, I mean, assuming usually on campus, it consumes around 5,000, 6,000 lines of code. So single error, it is very tedious to detect that unless you are very proficient enough to detect that. So there is no relation between the equivalence and the compiler correctness as far as I mean my knowledge is concerned. Is this fine, Nilesh Garg? Okay. So shall we stop, guys, unless you don't have any other doubt?
So what is the platform for conducting quizzes?
So we'll prefer the obviously either Nalanda or Google Forms for it.
Okay, sir.
Okay. Any other thing, guys? Okay, guys, then I'm stopping here if you don't have anything to discuss.